No matter if you're a chronic restarter, a min-maxer, or you just can't decide what player species to choose for your first playthrough, it's helpful to know the pros and cons to the different animal types you can choose for your character in Grimshire. So today, we're going over some strengths and weaknesses of the different species you can play as, so you can make the best choice for your playthrough. What player species are there? As of right now, there are 9 species in the game: deer, rabbit, fox, mustelid or stoat, feline, bear, raccoon, rodent, and pig. The first major difference between the species is their diet type. Each species falls into one of 3 categories based on the food they prefer to eat: carnivore, herbivore, or omnivore. Carnivores primarily eat fish, meat, and eggs, and the playable carnivore species are the fox, mustelid, and feline. Herbivores primarily eat fruits, mushrooms, vegetables, grains, nuts, herbs, and flowers. The playable herbivore species are the rabbit and the deer. Omnivores can eat all food items, and the playable omnivores are the bear, raccoon, rodent, and pig. It's important to know that carnivores and herbivores will receive a 50% stamina bonus when they eat foods that match their natural diet, and they also receive a 50% stamina reduction when they eat foods that don't match their preferred food choice. Omnivores don't gain a bonus or receive a penalty for eating any type of food. Instead, they just have a set middle ground stamina value that they get that's a little bit lower. How does this work in practice though? Let's say you foraged a blackberry while walking around the map. This berry is an herbivore food. It has a base omnivore stamina value of 4, meaning if you play as an omnivore and choose to eat it, it will restore 4 stamina for you. However, if you are a herbivore and you decide to eat this berry, you will receive a 50% increase to that value of stamina you'd get for eating it, meaning the same berry would restore 6 stamina for you instead, since it matches your natural herbivore diet. Conversely, if you are playing as a carnivore, which prefers to eat meat, and you choose to eat the berry, you'd receive 50% less stamina than the omnivore value, meaning the berry would only restore 2 stamina if you decided to eat it. Let's do one more example, this time with a whitefish, which is a type of carnivore food. The whitefish has a base omnivore stamina value of 24, meaning if you play an omnivore and you choose to eat it, it will restore 24 stamina for you. If you're a carnivore and you eat it, you will get a whopping 36 stamina from the same whitefish, since it matches your natural meat eater diet. And if you are a herbivore, which doesn't typically eat meat, and you choose to eat the whitefish, you will only receive 12 stamina. Through these examples, you can see that as long as you have the right food type for your species available to you, both herbivore and carnivore typically come out ahead in the long run compared to omnivore for how much stamina they'll give you from the same amount of food. So, which is the best to choose, carnivore, herbivore, or omnivore? For carnivores, fish are extremely easy to get in the early game, and although this does become a bit more difficult around the middle of the game, if you start raising farm animals early, or stockpile some food in anticipation of that, you pretty much negate this problem. Carnivore foods, like fish, also tend to restore a lot of stamina for you early on, so as long as you enjoy fishing or raising critters for your farm, this is a pretty good diet type to choose. Herbivores, on the other hand, restore more food from things like forageables, which are also extremely easy to get pretty much year-round. It's not unusual to get an excess of berries while you're just running around the map gathering, especially in the early and mid-game. And although they don't restore as much stamina, once you do start doing cooking in the game or raising animals like chicories and girdles, you won't usually feel much of a gap in difficulty between getting stamina-rich carnivore or herbivore foods for your character. Omnivores, though, are a jack of all trades and master of none. If you're worried you might have trouble consistently having either herbivore or carnivore food on hand and just want a species type that can eat anything with an average stamina gain if they need to, that's where omnivores shine. However, when an omnivore eats either herbivore or carnivore food, as I mentioned, they restore a lot less stamina than if an herbivore or carnivore was to eat their preferred food type. So even though the omnivore can eat anything, it feels like a bit of a waste of food overall, since they will typically have to eat more overall food than an herbivore or carnivore would just to get the same amount of stamina from their chosen food type. Also, if you're in an absolute food emergency, since carnivores and herbivores can both eat outside of their respective diets, just at a 50% stamina reduction, it doesn't feel like omnivores are quite on par with them when it comes to getting the most of your food. As long as you feel confident that you can consistently obtain a certain type of food throughout the game, I think both carnivores and herbivores are quite strong, perhaps equally so. Maybe by a very slight margin, I'd personally prefer the carnivore diet, but that's because I typically like to fish a lot, rush the quest in the middle of the game to keep fishing consistent, and often invest early in the angler skill. But I also do a lot of foraging and end up eating tons of berries in my playthroughs because I tend to have extras of them. So herbivore food is not hard to obtain either, and both are an excellent choice if you're looking to min-max your playstyle, with Omnivore just feeling like it falls a little bit behind overall. After you've decided whether you'd like to play as a carnivore, herbivore, or an omnivore, the next thing you'll want to consider are the perks that naturally come with each species type. Let's go through the carnivore species first. I'll start by ranking the perks I personally think are best in each category, carnivore, herbivore, and omnivore, as we go, but then at the end, I'll make a tier list showing what I think are the strongest overall skills across the different diet types. First off in the carnivore category are two species that I believe have excellent built-in perks. The fox species Fox in the Hen House skill, which gives you a 20% chance for your bluggies to lay extra eggs, and the felines Get That Cream skill, which gives a 20% chance for your alfeep to give you extra milk. Both of these are great skills if you are choosing to raise these specific farm animals. As I talked more about in my guide on farm animals in Grimshire, I typically get bluggies or alfeeps as one of my first farm animals, and I think they are excellent overall. Even if you're not planning on doing butchering, these species skills are great for just getting extra animal products in general. Bluggy eggs are a fantastic carnivore food, restoring 22 stamina, and they can be pickled, salted, or made into mayo to never spoil later in the game, or cooked into recipes too. Meanwhile, alfeep milk is an equivalent herbivore, carnivore, and omnivore food, restoring 15 stamina for each, making it also very versatile. Later in the game, it can be processed into cheese, which has a spoiling time of 19 days, or butter to be used in various recipes. Between both of these skills, I might slightly prefer Get That Cream, just because it is great no matter what point you are at in the game and what type of food you happen to be struggling with in a pinch. But Fox in the Hen House is also phenomenal for carnivores, and because the eggs can be preserved to never spoil. So both of these species perks are very good, and it might really depend on what critter you plan to get first for your farm. Not quite up to par with the other two carnivore skills though, Avian Hunter, the Mustelid skill, gives you a small 2% chance for lean meat to drop when trees are shaken or chopped. In my opinion, although I do go around shaking trees constantly in the game to get bottled surprises, seeds, and so on, the chance for a piece of meat to drop from this skill is quite low. In early game, it might feel more difficult to get carnivore food, particularly if you're not choosing to do much fishing, but this skill still doesn't feel quite as good as the other carnivore species skills unless you do plan on shaking or chopping trees a lot and just want a little extra benefit. Carnivore food also becomes quite a bit easier to get if you decide to raise farm animals or do butchering later on too, so this skill is more of an icing on the cake thing as opposed to something you might heavily rely on. Next, we'll cover the herbivores. First up is the deer's species skill, Efficient Grazer. This gives you a 50% chance to get an additional hay grass every time you harvest hay. And it's hard to say anything negative about this skill. Hay is arguably one of the strongest crops in Grimshire. It grows for most of the year, requires very little effort to maintain, and is one of the most passive and reliable resources you can invest in. That extra 50% chance to harvest an additional hay adds up quickly too. It's valuable for crafting higher quality kibbles for farm animals, stocking fish traps with bait, and even processing surplus hay for storage in your root cellar. It is, overall, just very versatile and consistent from early game all the way to late game. Many players even rely heavily on hay maxing strategies to survive the hardest game difficulties. Therefore, this skill, which further maximizes your hay, is quite excellent. Next, we have the rabbit's inherent skill, Green Claw, which increases the chance of getting bumper crops while gardening by 10%. In Grimshire, a bumper crop is an extra crop that can grow alongside your other crops in your garden when you're ready to harvest. It appears alongside your normal yield, essentially giving you bonus harvest for free. And a 10% increased chance for this to happen with every single crop you grow is quite good, especially if you're heavily invested in gardening in the game. The more you grow, the more the value of this perk scales, and it stacks with any fertilizer you use too. That said, because hay is so easy to grow in Grimshire and doesn't require stamina to water, it is tough to recommend this over-efficient grazer if your strategy revolves around mass hay production, which many players do rely on. But in my opinion, bumper crop is honestly very close in usefulness. If you're waiting for both the original crop and extra bumper crop to go to seed, or just using the seed saver skill, there's also potential to get both extra produce and extra seeds from the same harvest, effectively compounding the skill's value. But overall, both herbivore skills do feel extremely strong. It really just comes down to whether you want to specialize in hay efficiency or maximize your broader garden output. And now the omnivores. The best of the skills for omnivores, in my opinion, is the pig skill Girtle Whisperer. It increases the number of girdle shrooms you'll receive from shearing your girdles. This is a pretty nice species perk because girdle shrooms are excellent herbivore food, and getting extras of them is great. If you plan on raising girdles specifically, especially early on in your game, this is a skill that may feel pretty excellent, particularly if you do tend to struggle more with herbivore food than carnivore food in your playthroughs. However, it seems like most players tend to choose to tame girdles a little later than the other farm animals, as carnivore food is usually the harder food type to get for most players around early to mid-game. However, this skill isn't a bad one and ultimately depends on your farm strategy and where girdles sit as part of your plan in Grimshire. Next is the rodent skill Winter Stash, which increases the number of nuts you'll receive from trees. Once again, this is a decent skill, but the thing is that it won't help you in early game at all, since trees don't tend to drop nuts until later seasons in the game. Meanwhile, a lot of the other playable character skills can help you every day at certain times throughout the year, or just all the time when you perform relevant activities. So this skill does feel more niche than some of the other species perks and less overarchingly helpful. However, food does get hardest toward the end of year 1, especially if you haven't prepared for winter thoroughly, so it could be an okay skill if you plan to use it primarily for that purpose. This is a decent skill, but mostly situational. The biggest drawback is that it offers little to no value to you in the early game, since trees typically don't start dropping nuts until later in the year. So that delay makes it harder to feel the benefit of this perk right away. And it isn't great for players who are looking for a species skill that will help them out in the early to mid-game time frame. There are other species skills that do help you more universally, so this skill is mainly only helpful if you specifically are struggling with food pressure as it spikes around the end of year 1, which you'll particularly feel if you haven't prepared thoroughly enough for the winter. In that context, Winter Stash can serve as a helpful safety net, boosting your late season food reserves when they matter the most. So while it's not the most universally impactful skill across all the seasons in Grimshire, it can be worthwhile if you're planning around winter survival and nut-based food strategies. Second to last in the omnivore category is the Raccoon skill Late Night Munchies, which increases the amount of stamina you regain from any food eaten after 8 p.m. This skill is okay since many players tend to run low on stamina toward the end of the day anyway. So if you're already eating in the evening to squeeze out a few more tasks before bed, the bonus stamina does feel like it pretty naturally integrates into your routine. However, the limitation to this skill only working after 8 p.m. does hold it back a bit, as having a conditional stamina boost that doesn't work all the time just doesn't feel as impactful as the consistent benefits you would receive from simply playing as a carnivore or herbivore, so long as you can handle the food type demands to do so. You'll get a much bigger increase from just eating your preferred food overall than you would from using this skill. Plus, the other species perks add additional benefits to help your gameplay. So, while Late Night Munchies can be fine for night owl playstyles, it doesn't quite compete with the more reliable, always active stamina boost available from playing a carnivore or herbivore. And it also doesn't give you any additional powerful benefits like the other species types would. Last is the bear skill Beary Master, which increases the amount of berries you'll get from harvesting berry bushes. In my playthroughs though, I often ended up with more berries than I could reasonably use, so the extra yield from this skill doesn't really feel particularly impactful. While it's true that berries are a solid herbivore food and that some players may struggle to keep up with herbivore food in mid to late year 1, careful planning usually ensures you'll have enough herbivore food without relying on this skill. Because of that, I just think getting the extra berries does feel a little weaker compared to the other species skills that do provide more consistent or broadly useful benefits. Now let's break down all of the species skills based on their overall usefulness and impact throughout the game. I'll start with D tier, which are the skills that I think are generally less good overall compared to the other species perks in the game. The first skill that makes this D tier ranking is the Beary Master perk, just because berries are already very easy to obtain and often abundant if you're doing foraging in the game, so it doesn't feel like much of a game changer to have, especially when compared to the other species skills. And the next skill that makes this ranking as well is the Raccoon's Late Night Munchies perk, which makes it so your character will gain 30% more stamina from food eaten after 8 p.m. Like I said before, this skill is fine if you really value being an omnivore and want to be able to eat either carnivore or herbivore foods with kind of a middle amount of stamina gained overall. But I personally feel like this skill just kind of makes up for the omnivore's average amount rather than giving you much of an additional strength for your species. A 30% stamina boost at night just isn't quite as good as simply playing as a carnivore or herbivore and getting a 50% increase from your preferred food type all the time. It's also a bit niche in the fact that it only works at night after 8 p.m., but this might not matter too much like I said, if you're typically running out of stamina mainly at the end of the day, and that ends up being the primary time your character eats their meals. Alone in the C tier skills category is Rodent Winter Stash, which, as I noted before, is a bit niche as well. It won't help you much in early to mid game, but does start to become more useful in later game, so it really depends on how well you prepared for wintertime on your own, whether or not you'll find this skill very helpful. When the other species skills allow you to reap benefits all year long, or for the majority of the year, it might not be super beneficial. So this skill is ranked lower than some of the next ones we'll go through, but it does depend on your food needs and playstyle. Next is B tier, which are perks that are technically similarly good to A and S tier, but just require a more uncommon playstyle to make use of. In this tier is the Pig's Girtle Whisperer skill, which is somewhat comparable to perks like Fox in the Hen House and Get That Cream. However, since many players prefer to get girdles later in the game compared to bluggies or alfeeps, due to the fact that most players find carnivore food more difficult to obtain in early game and herbivore food sometimes more difficult in late game, these other two skills may come out ahead for most playstyles, but this is very dependent on how you like to play and what your food needs are in the game. If you do plan on getting girdles early on compared to the other critters, it is a solid skill. I'm only listing it lower in the tier list here because I personally think girdles fit in a bit more with mid-game. Now we have A tier, which are decent skills that are slightly less powerful than S tier, but still reasonably helpful. There's just one species perk in here as well, and that is the Mustelid's Avian Hunter skill. That's just because the percentage chance for meat to drop from trees is statistically quite low, and it just overall doesn't feel quite as strong as the S tier species perks do. However, it is still helpful, especially in early game or if you are finding yourself shaking and cutting trees often. So it's certainly not a bad perk, it's just maybe a bit less efficient as some of the higher ranked skills are. And now lastly, we have the S tier skills, which are all, in my opinion, some of the most generally helpful skills to have in the game. We'll start with the Rabbit's Green Claw skill. Having a 10% chance of getting extra crops is great, especially if you plan on doing a lot of gardening and if you're using the Seed Saver skill or fertilizer to really maximize those yields. So it fits squarely into the S tier in my opinion in terms of its helpfulness. The Feline's Get That Cream skill is also a top tier choice, as long as you plan on choosing alfeeps as one of your early farm animals. As I said before, milk is versatile for both herbivores and carnivores and is great in a wide variety of recipes, making this quite excellent as well. The Fox's Fox in the Hen House perk is also fantastic, just as long as you plan on raising bluggies as one of your first farm critters, since the eggs are an excellent carnivore food and can be processed to never spoil, and it gives you a 20% chance to get an extra egg each time your bluggies lay one. And finally, the Deer's Efficient Grazer species perk is up at the top as one of the best, since, as I mentioned, hay is just such a lucrative crop overall, and the extra chance to get an additional hay from every single harvest is quite solid. There are so many uses in the game for hay, and the fact that it doesn't need watered like other crops makes it easy to depend on as a major staple for your farm. Really though, you can't go wrong with any of the skills in this tier. They all have very tangible benefits that should significantly help most players in their playthrough playthroughs. With that said, you don't have to meta pick your character if there's a species you simply enjoy aesthetically or just want to play as. This guide is mainly geared toward min-maxers who want to optimize their playstyle or take on some of the game's harder difficulties. For example, I personally prefer playing as an omnivore, specifically the rodent, even though I ranked omnivores as the weakest diet type overall. The rodent's ability to gather extra nuts doesn't provide much value for me in the early game, and as an omnivore, I have to eat more food to match the stamina efficiency that carnivores and herbivores get from their preferred diets. But honestly, I just think the mouse character is cute, and there's nothing more to it, so I still do enjoy playing as one. So above all, choose the species you just like the most. As I mentioned in a previous video, you won't be able to ask Logan to change your species once you've chosen it. He can only adjust your appearance. So do choose something you will genuinely enjoy playing as. Also, keep in mind that since Grimshire is still in early access, species skills may be buffed or nerfed throughout development, making them more or less effective over time. I'll do my best to note any major balance changes in a pinned comment beneath this video as I get the time though, just so you can stay up to date on what species might be better or worse. And of course, these are just my personal opinions about the species types I believe may be most helpful to play as. But everyone has things they prefer more or less in terms of strategy, so if a specific species perk does resonate with you, do try it out to see if you end up liking it. I hope this guide gives you a helpful reference to consider when choosing which animal species you'd like to play as in Grimshire. Like I said, don't be afraid to pick whatever species resonates with you the most, even if it's not necessarily meta. Even on the higher difficulties, you can still make your favorite species work. This guide is simply here for players who want to optimize their experience for the higher game difficulties or make playing the game feel a bit easier overall. If you found this video helpful, be sure to like, subscribe, and check out my other Grimshire guides on the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and have fun choosing your player species.